My name is Delilah Morrison. I'm 34 years old, and 3 months ago, I sat in a courtroom listening to my own parents testify that I should be legally obligated to support my sister's child, the child my husband fathered. The same parents who raised me to believe family comes first, who taught me that blood is thicker than water, were now weaponizing those very values against me. They spoke passionately about innocent children needing support, about moral obligations, about how successful people like me have responsibilities. What they didn't know was that I had been quietly gathering evidence for months, evidence that would not only destroy their case, but expose a family conspiracy that went back decades. Before we dive into this wild family revenge story, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? If you're here for some serious family drama and justice being served, smash that like button and hit subscribe, because you're not going to believe what unfolds next. Trust me, this story has more twists than a soap opera, and by the end, you'll understand why sometimes the people closest to you can become your greatest enemies. Let's get into it. The betrayal started 18 months ago, on what should have been one of the happiest days of my life. I had just received a promotion to regional director at my marketing firm, doubling my salary and finally achieving the financial stability I'd worked 10 years for. I rushed home to tell Marcus, my husband of 7 years, expecting champagne and celebration. Instead, I found him pacing our living room, his face pale and his hands shaking. "Delilah, we need to talk," he said, unable to meet my eyes. Those 5 words that every spouse dreads hearing. I set down my briefcase, my promotion suddenly feeling meaningless. I made a mistake, a huge mistake. My sister Cassandra had always been the family's problem child. 2 years younger than me, she'd struggled with addiction, jumped from job to job, and had a string of failed relationships that always ended with her crying on my parents' couch. Despite everything, I'd always been her safety net. I'd loaned her money more times than I could count, let her crash at our place during her worst periods, and even helped her get clean twice. Marcus had always been supportive of helping her, which made what came next feel like a double betrayal. It happened during her birthday party last month. Marcus continued, still unable to look at me. She was drunk, emotional about turning 32 and having nothing to show for it. I was trying to comfort her, and things just happened. It was one night, Delilah, one stupid, horrible mistake. The room started spinning. Cassandra's birthday party. I remembered that night clearly because I'd had food poisoning and left early, telling Marcus to stay and help clean up. I'd even thanked him the next morning for being such a supportive brother-in-law. The irony was nauseating. "Why are you telling me this now?" I managed to ask, though part of me already knew. "She's pregnant," he whispered. 3 months along. She wants to keep it." The next few weeks were a blur of tears, arguments, and sleepless nights. I moved into our guest room while trying to process the magnitude of their betrayal. What hurt almost more than the affair itself was how calculated it felt. Cassandra had been staying with us for 2 weeks leading up to her birthday, claiming she needed support during a rough patch. I'd welcomed her with open arms, cooked her meals, and listened to her talk about wanting to turn her life around. Had she been planning this the entire time Marcus begged for forgiveness, insisting it meant nothing, and that he wanted to work on our marriage? But how do you rebuild trust when the betrayal involves your own sister? How do you move forward when every family gathering would include a living reminder of their affair? The child would be my niece or nephew and my husband's biological child. The family dynamics were permanently destroyed. I filed for divorce 3 weeks after the confession. Marcus didn't contest it, though he did ask to keep the house, since he'd need space for his new responsibilities. I agreed, too emotionally drained to fight over property. I found a sleek downtown apartment that felt like a fresh start somewhere, with no memories of shared dreams or broken promises. The pregnancy progressed, and I watched from a distance as my parents rallied around Cassandra and Marcus. They organized baby showers, helped paint a nursery, and treated the situation like an unexpected blessing rather than the result of betrayal. My mother actually told me I should find it in my heart to forgive because that baby didn't ask for this situation. As if I was the problem for being hurt by my sister sleeping with my husband. What happened next revealed the true nature of my family's loyalty system, and it wasn't what I'd expected. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, my parents called a family meeting at their house. I almost didn't go, but curiosity got the better of me. I needed to understand how they were processing this situation and where I fit into their vision of the future. The meeting was surreal. My parents, Cassandra and Marcus, sat around the same dining room table where we'd celebrated countless holidays and birthdays. Baby ultrasound photos were scattered across the surface, like party decorations. My mother had prepared coffee and cookies, as if this was a normal family gathering, rather than a discussion about my ex-husband's affair baby with my sister. "Delilah, we're so glad you came," my father began using his family patriarch voice that I remembered from childhood lectures. "We need to discuss practical matters regarding the baby." "What practical matters?" I asked, genuinely confused. "I'm not involved in this situation." My parents exchanged glances that I couldn't interpret at the time. "Well, that's actually what we need to talk about," my mother said carefully. "Cassandra doesn't have health insurance and Marcus's job doesn't offer great coverage. The medical bills are already mounting, and there will be ongoing expenses after the baby arrives." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What does that have to do with me? You're the most financially stable person in the family," my father continued. "Your promotion, your new salary. You're in a position to help, and this baby is your niece or nephew. Family helps family." The audacity was breathtaking. They wanted me to financially support the child born from my husband's affair with my sister. They were framing it as a moral obligation based on family bonds and my financial success. Cassandra sat silently, occasionally rubbing her growing belly, while Marcus stared at his hands. Neither of them spoke during this entire conversation, letting my parents make their case. "I understand you're hurt," my mother said, reaching across the table toward my hand. I pulled it away. "But holding grudges helps no one. This baby deserves the best possible start in life, and you have the means to provide that." "The best possible start would have been not being conceived through adultery," I replied, my voice colder than I'd ever used with my parents. "That's not the baby's fault," my father said firmly. "You can't punish an innocent child for the mistakes of adults." The conversation continued for another hour, with my parents presenting various arguments about family responsibility, Christian forgiveness, and practical financial planning. They had clearly rehearsed their points and anticipated my objections. They even had spreadsheets showing potential monthly expenses and how my contribution could be structured. The level of planning was disturbing. What struck me most was how they'd completely reframed the narrative. In their version, Cassandra was a struggling single mother who needed family support. Marcus was a man trying to do right by his responsibilities, and I was the successful family member who could either step up or be selfish. The affair was barely mentioned, and when it was, they treated it like an unfortunate accident rather than a deliberate betrayal. I left that meeting feeling more isolated than ever. My entire family had closed ranks around the affair couple and their unborn child, leaving me as the outsider who was expected to fall in line or be labeled as vindictive. They'd weaponized family loyalty and financial guilt to pressure me into supporting the very people who had destroyed my marriage. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated my patience and my ability to play the long game. If they wanted to treat this like a business transaction with spreadsheets and financial obligations, then I would approach it like the strategic businesswoman they seemed to think I was. 8 months after that family meeting, baby Emma was born. I didn't visit the hospital, didn't send gifts, and didn't acknowledge the birth announcements that flooded social media. My absence was noted and criticized by extended family members who had heard my parents' version of events. I was painted as the bitter ex-wife who couldn't move past her grudges even when it came to an innocent baby. For 6 months, I maintained my distance while my parents continued their pressure campaign. They sent photos, invited me to birthday parties I didn't attend, and made passive-aggressive comments about how some people couldn't put family first. Cassandra had moved in with Marcus, and they were playing house while my parents provided free childcare and financial support. Everyone seemed to have forgotten that this entire situation started with adultery. Then came the legal papers. I was served at my office on a Tuesday morning right before a major client presentation. The documents were thick and official, bearing the letterhead of Henderson and Associates, the same law firm my father had used for his business dealings for 20 years. My hands shook as I read the petition. They were seeking a court order requiring me to contribute to Emma's support based on my family relationship and superior financial position. The legal language was complex, but the intent was clear. They wanted a judge to force me to pay monthly support for my sister's affair baby with my ex-husband. The petition painted me as a wealthy family member who was shirking her moral and familial obligations to an innocent child. The most shocking part was the list of petitioners. My parents, Cassandra and Marcus, had all signed on as co-petitioners. They were taking me to court as a united front, using their shared legal representation to force my compliance. The betrayal felt fresh all over again, but this time, it came with the added sting of legal intimidation. I immediately called my attorney, Rebecca Sterling, who had handled my divorce. She was furious when I read her the petition over the phone. "This is the most ridiculous thing I've seen in 15 years of family law," she said. "There's no legal precedent for forcing a sibling to support their sister's child, especially under these circumstances. They're wasting everyone's time and money." "So we can get it dismissed?" I asked, feeling a glimmer of hope. "Probably, but not before they drag you through months of legal proceedings and try to destroy your reputation in the process. Your parents are clearly hoping that the stress and expense will force you to settle and agree to ongoing payments." The strategy was becoming clear. They couldn't force me morally, so they were using legal pressure and public shame to break me down. They were betting that I'd rather pay monthly support than endure a public court battle where all the family drama would be aired in front of a judge. But they had miscalculated in a fundamental way. They thought I was the same person who had quietly accepted their pressure 18 months ago, who had moved out of my house without fighting for it, who had tried to maintain family peace even after being betrayed. They didn't realize that I had spent those months not just nursing my wounds, but planning my response. During our first strategy session, Rebecca asked me a question that changed everything. "Do you have any evidence that might explain why they're so confident about this legal action? Because I have to tell you, Delilah, this petition is so legally groundless that either they have terrible lawyers or they know something we don't." That question sent me down a rabbit hole that would ultimately expose the truth about my family's finances and the real reason they were so desperate for my money. I started with what I knew: my parents had always been financially comfortable, but not wealthy. Cassandra had never held a steady job for more than a year, and Marcus's insurance adjuster salary was decent but not spectacular. Yet somehow, they'd been supporting a household of 3 adults and a baby without any apparent strain. I hired a private investigator named David Chen, a former police detective who specialized in financial fraud cases. I gave him everything I knew about my family's financial situation and asked him to dig deeper. What he found over the next 6 weeks was more shocking than I ever could have imagined. The truth was about to turn this family court case into something much bigger than anyone expected. And when I finally spoke in that courtroom, my parents would realize that their perfect plan had one fatal flaw: they had underestimated exactly how much I was willing to sacrifice to make sure justice was served. I know this is getting intense, and we're right at the moment where everything changes. If you're feeling that mix of anger and anticipation right now, you're exactly where I was 6 months ago. Before we get to the explosive courtroom scene, take a second to hit that like button if you're invested in seeing how this all plays out. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? You're going to want to see how this ends. Trust me, the next part changes everything. David Chen was methodical in his investigation, and what he uncovered was a web of financial deception that went back years before my divorce. It started with my parents' tax returns, which he obtained through legitimate channels that I don't need to detail here. What mattered was the discrepancy between their reported income and their actual lifestyle. On paper, my father's small accounting firm showed modest profits, and my mother's part-time teaching brought in supplemental income. Together, they should have been comfortable, but not wealthy. Yet David's surveillance and financial analysis revealed a very different picture. They owned 2 properties beyond their primary residence, had significant investments in offshore accounts, and had made large cash purchases that weren't reflected in their legitimate income sources. The breakthrough came when David traced a series of wire transfers from my father's business account to various shell companies. The amounts were significant, tens of thousands of dollars moved monthly for the past 3 years. What made it particularly interesting was the timing. The transfers had increased dramatically right around the time Marcus and Cassandra's affair began. "Your father's been laundering money," David explained. During our meeting at a downtown coffee shop, his voice low despite the noise around us. "He's using his accounting firm to clean money for several local businesses, taking a percentage as his fee. The legitimate accounting work is just a front for a much more profitable operation." The pieces started falling into place. My father's accounting firm had always seemed too small to support their lifestyle, but I'd assumed they were just good savers. In reality, he'd been operating a money laundering operation for years, helping local business owners hide income from the IRS. The offshore accounts, the cash purchases, the ability to support Marcus and Cassandra without financial strain. It all made sense now. But here's where it gets really interesting. David continued, sliding a folder across the table. The money laundering operation expanded significantly about 2 years ago. Your father brought in new clients, bigger money, more complex schemes, and according to my sources, both Marcus and Cassandra have been involved. The documents in the folder detailed how Marcus had been using his position as an insurance adjuster to facilitate fraudulent claims, funneling the payouts through my father's laundering operation. Cassandra, despite her apparent lack of steady employment, had been serving as a courier and coordinator for the operation. The affair wasn't just about sex or emotional connection, it was about bringing together 2 key players in an expanding criminal enterprise. "They needed you out of the picture," David explained. "Your legitimate success, your high-profile job, your clean financial record, you were a liability. If the operation ever got investigated, having a squeaky clean family member with connections in the business community would raise questions about how much you knew." The divorce suddenly looked very different. They hadn't just betrayed me personally, they'd orchestrated my removal from the family to protect their criminal operation. The pregnancy was either incredibly convenient timing or a calculated move to ensure I stayed away from family finances. Either way, it served their purposes perfectly. But the most shocking revelation was still coming. David had managed to access records showing that my parents had been stealing from me for years. Remember all those times I'd loaned money to Cassandra, the emergency funds for her apartment deposits, car repairs, and medical bills? Most of those emergencies had been fabricated. The money had gone directly into funding their operation, with Cassandra keeping a percentage for her performance. "They've been using you as an unwitting investor in their criminal enterprise," David said. "Conservatively, you've contributed about $40,000 over the past 5 years, thinking you were helping your sister when you were actually funding money laundering and insurance fraud." The legal case against me suddenly made perfect sense. They weren't just trying to get monthly support for Emma. They were trying to establish a legal precedent that would give them ongoing access to my legitimate income. If a court ordered me to pay support, those payments could be structured to flow through accounts connected to their operation, effectively forcing me to continue funding their criminal activities under the guise of supporting a child. David's investigation also revealed why they were so confident about their legal strategy. My father had been laundering money for Judge Harrison, the same judge assigned to hear our case. The fix was in from the beginning. They expected Judge Harrison to rule in their favor, regardless of legal precedent, and they were probably right. But here's what they didn't know. David Chen wasn't just a private investigator. He was also a federal informant, feeding information to the FBI's white-collar crime division about money laundering operations in the area. My family's case had landed on the radar of an ongoing federal investigation. The FBI has been building a case against your father's operation for 8 months, David told me at our final meeting. They were just waiting for enough evidence to make arrests. What you've provided combined with what they already had is more than enough to bring charges against everyone involved. The federal agents wanted to coordinate with my civil case. If I could keep the family court proceedings going long enough, it would give them time to finalize their criminal case. When my parents Marcus and Cassandra thought they were about to get a court order forcing me to pay support, they would instead be facing federal charges for money laundering, insurance fraud, and racketeering. The plan was beautifully simple. I would appear to fight the civil case on its merits, letting my family think they were winning. Meanwhile, federal agents would be watching and gathering final evidence. When the judge was ready to issue his corrupted ruling in their favor, the FBI would make their arrests right there in the courtroom. Justice was about to be served, but not in the way anyone expected. The next 2 months were the most challenging acting performance of my life. I had to appear defeated and desperate while secretly coordinating with federal agents to ensure everything would unfold perfectly in court. My family interpreted my apparent compliance as confirmation that their strategy was working. Rebecca Sterling, my attorney, was brought into the federal coordination effort after signing multiple confidentiality agreements. She played her role perfectly, filing motions that appeared to challenge the petition while actually providing opportunities for my family to incriminate themselves further. Every legal document they filed contained lies about their finances, each one adding to the federal case against them. During this period, my family ramped up their pressure campaign. My mother called daily, sometimes in tears, talking about Emma's needs and my moral obligations. She sent photos of the baby descriptions of medical appointments I should be helping to pay for, and guilt-inducing stories about how my selfishness was hurting an innocent child. Each conversation was recorded with FBI equipment capturing her attempts to coerce financial support. Cassandra played the struggling single mother role to perfection, posting social media content about the challenges of raising a baby without sufficient support. She never mentioned the thousands of dollars flowing through the family's criminal operation, instead focusing on diaper costs and daycare expenses. The performance was Oscar-worthy, especially considering she was living in a house that Marcus had paid for with insurance fraud money. Marcus maintained his position as the responsible father trying to do right by his child. He sent me formal letters requesting support outlining his income and expenses with carefully crafted numbers that hid his criminal earnings. He portrayed himself as a working-class father struggling to provide for his family, conveniently omitting his role in a multi-million-dollar fraud operation. My father took the role of family patriarch, seriously scheduling meetings, where he presented financial projections and moral arguments about family responsibility. He used his accounting background to create compelling documents showing Emma's projected needs and how my income could meet them. Every spreadsheet was a masterpiece of manipulation, designed to make their request seem reasonable and my resistance seem cruel. The depositions were particularly surreal. I sat across from my family members as they testified under oath about their finances, knowing that every lie they told was being documented for the federal case. They painted themselves as financially struggling while hiding millions in offshore accounts. They described their relationship with me as loving and supportive while omitting their systematic theft of my money over the years. Judge Harrison played his part exactly as expected. During pretrial hearings, he consistently ruled in favor of my family's motions while dismissing my attorney's objections. He made comments about family obligations and moral responsibilities that clearly indicated his intended ruling. The corruption was so obvious that Rebecca had to stop herself from objecting to his bias, knowing it would interfere with the federal operation. The most difficult part was watching my extended family and friends react to the situation. Many of them had heard my parents' version of events and believed I was being unreasonably vindictive toward an innocent baby. I received countless messages encouraging me to be the bigger person and put family first. Social media posts from relatives praised Marcus and Cassandra for their strength, while subtly criticizing my absence from Emma's life. I had to let them think I was the villain in this story, at least temporarily. Every public appearance where I seemed cold or distant toward Emma was noted and discussed. My parents made sure everyone knew about the legal case, portraying it as their last resort to get support for their granddaughter from her wealthy aunt, who refused to help voluntarily. The isolation was crushing at times. I couldn't explain my side of the story or defend myself against their accusations. I had to watch my reputation suffer while protecting an investigation that would ultimately vindicate me. There were nights when I questioned whether the eventual justice would be worth the immediate pain of being cast as the family villain. But every time I wavered, I remembered David Chen's words. They've been stealing from you for years and planned your divorce to protect their criminal operation. This isn't just about the affair anymore. This is about holding people accountable for crimes that hurt far more than just your family. 2 weeks before the court date, FBI agents informed me that they had enough evidence to proceed with arrests. The timing would be crucial. They needed to wait until Judge Harrison committed to his corrupt ruling before intervening. If they acted too early, the judge could claim he was planning to rule fairly all along. The plan was set. My family would arrive at court expecting to receive a ruling that would force me to pay monthly support for Emma. Instead, they would leave in handcuffs facing decades in federal prison for their crimes. Judge Harrison would also be arrested for corruption, bringing down the entire conspiracy in one coordinated operation. As I prepared for what would be the most important court appearance of my life, I felt a mix of anticipation and nervousness. My family had no idea what was coming, but I knew that within hours the truth would finally be revealed and justice would be served. The morning of the court hearing, I arrived early and sat in the back of the courtroom, watching my family file in with their attorney. They looked confident, almost triumphant as they took their seats at the plaintiff's table. My parents wore their best clothes and serious expressions, playing the role of concerned grandparents seeking help for their granddaughter. Marcus carried a folder of documents, probably more fabricated financial statements. Cassandra held Emma, who had grown into a beautiful 10-month-old baby, who had no idea she was at the center of such a twisted conspiracy. The gallery was fuller than I expected. Several relatives had come to witness what they thought would be my court-ordered humiliation. A few local reporters were present, having heard about the unusual case of family members suing to force support payments. Everyone expected a routine hearing where Judge Harrison would lecture me about family responsibility before ordering monthly payments. Judge Harrison entered with his usual pompous demeanor, clearly looking forward to his moment of corrupted authority. He called the case and began with a lengthy speech about the importance of family bonds and the responsibility of successful individuals to support children in need. As he spoke, I noticed several people in the gallery who didn't look like typical court observers. FBI agents positioned themselves strategically around the room. Mrs. Morrison. Judge Harrison addressed me directly. This court has reviewed the petition and finds that while there is no direct legal obligation for you to support your sister's child, there are compelling moral and familial considerations that warrant this court's intervention. My family members exchanged satisfied glances. This was going exactly as they had planned. Your financial capacity is substantially greater than that of the child's parents, the judge continued, and your familial relationship creates both opportunity and obligation to ensure this child's welfare. Rebecca Sterling stood to make her final argument, but Judge Harrison waved her down. "The court has heard enough arguments, counselor. This is a matter of conscience and family responsibility." That was the moment the FBI had been waiting for. As Judge Harrison opened his mouth to announce his corrupt ruling, federal agents simultaneously stood throughout the courtroom. The lead agent stepped forward and announced loudly, "This court is now under federal jurisdiction. Judge Harrison, you are under arrest for corruption and conspiracy to commit money laundering." The next few minutes were chaos. Judge Harrison's face went from confusion to panic as agents read him his rights. My parents looked around wildly, trying to understand what was happening. Marcus dropped his folder, sending papers flying across the floor. Cassandra clutched Emma tighter, her face pale with shock. Robert Morrison, Sandra Morrison, Marcus Webb, and Cassandra Morrison, the lead agent, announced, "You are all under arrest for conspiracy to commit money laundering, insurance fraud, and racketeering." The agents moved efficiently, placing handcuffs on each family member while reading their Miranda rights. The courtroom erupted in gasps and whispers from the gallery. Several relatives who had come to witness my humiliation were now watching their family members being arrested for federal crimes. "Mrs. Morrison," the lead agent addressed me, "would you please approach the bench?" As I walked to the front of the courtroom, my father shouted, "Delilah, what did you do? How could you betray your own family?" I turned to face him, feeling a calm I hadn't experienced in months. "I didn't betray my family, Dad. I exposed criminals who happened to be related to me." The agent then did something that surprised everyone in the courtroom. He thanked me publicly for my cooperation in a federal investigation that had been ongoing for over a year. He explained that my family's civil case against me had provided crucial evidence of their criminal operation and attempts to force my continued participation in money laundering activities. The defendants orchestrated a scheme to remove Mrs. Morrison from their family finances while continuing to exploit her legitimate income for criminal purposes, the agent announced to the courtroom. The petition filed today was an attempt to establish legal access to her money under the guise of child support. The reporters in the gallery were frantically taking notes. This story had just transformed from a family dispute into a major federal crime case. The irony was perfect. My family's attempt to publicly shame me into compliance had instead created the perfect venue for exposing their crimes. As my family members were led away in handcuffs, my mother turned back to me with tears streaming down her face. "That baby needs you, Delilah. Whatever we did wrong, don't punish Emma." For the first time in months, I felt genuinely sad rather than angry. "Emma will be fine, Mom. She'll be raised by people who love her without exploiting her as a prop for criminal activities. That's more than she would have gotten with any of you." The courtroom cleared slowly with relatives and reporters filing out in stunned silence. I stayed behind with Rebecca and the federal agents to handle final paperwork and coordination for the criminal proceedings. The civil case against me was dismissed, obviously, but more importantly, the federal investigation had concluded successfully with arrests of all major participants. Over the following weeks, the full scope of the criminal operation became public through court filings and media reports. My father's accounting firm had laundered over $3 million for various criminal enterprises over 5 years. Marcus had facilitated over $800,000 in fraudulent insurance claims. Cassandra had been paid almost $200,000 for her role as courier and coordinator. Judge Harrison had received over $50,000 in cash payments for favorable rulings in cases connected to the operation. The money I had loaned to Cassandra over the years was recovered as part of the federal asset forfeiture. My parents' offshore accounts, their rental properties, and Marcus's house were all seized as proceeds of criminal activity. Emma, who truly was innocent in all of this, was placed with Marcus's parents in another state away from the criminal enterprise that had surrounded her birth. The sentences were severe but appropriate. My father received 15 years for organizing the money laundering operation. My mother got 8 years for her participation in the conspiracy. Marcus received 12 years for insurance fraud and money laundering. Cassandra, who cooperated with prosecutors after her arrest, received 6 years in federal prison. Judge Harrison was sentenced to 20 years and disbarred, ending a career built on corruption. Looking back now, 3 months after that dramatic courtroom scene, I realized this experience taught me that sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones who claim to love us. My family didn't just betray me personally. They tried to exploit my love and loyalty to fund their criminal activities. The affair was just one part of a larger conspiracy to remove me as a threat to their operation while maintaining access to my money. But here's what I want to know from all of you watching this. Have you ever discovered that people you trusted were using your love against you? Have you found yourself in situations where family loyalty was weaponized to make you accept unacceptable behavior? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I know I'm not the only one who's learned that blood isn't always thicker than water, and sometimes the most toxic people in our lives are the ones who share our DNA. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel reach people who might need to hear that they're not alone in dealing with family betrayal. And definitely subscribe with notifications on, because I've got more stories about standing up to toxic family members and finding justice when the system seems stacked against you. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that sometimes walking away from family is the healthiest choice you can make. Thank you for taking this journey with me and listening to how I learned that real family isn't about blood relations. It's about people who treat you with genuine love and respect. Sometimes the most important lesson life teaches us is that we get to choose who deserves a place in our story, and we don't have to keep toxic people just because we share genetics with them. Until next time, remember that your peace is worth more than anyone else's opinion of your choices.